Welcome to the Explainer. Okay, so the financial markets just went on a pretty surprising tear. And yeah, it's easy to just call it a technical rebound, but the real story? It's way more interesting. So let's dig in and find out what's really driving this thing.
So why the sudden jump? Look, this was not just some simple bounce. The real sparks were two massive news events that hit right as a much bigger global trend was already heating up. Let's break down exactly what happened.
And this is where it gets really fascinating. You can see this huge split in what investors were doing. The data here from the Coinbase Premium Index is showing us that while investors in Asia were buying like crazy, American investors were basically sitting on their hands. Right away, that tells you this isn't just a local story, there's something bigger happening on a global scale.
Okay, our first clue takes us right to Washington, D.C. A couple of major announcements came out of the U.S. Capitol, and they really provided that initial rocket fuel for the rally, starting with a pretty big financial promise.
So, in a social media post, Donald Trump brought back a really powerful proposal, a pretty significant cash payment for most Americans, and he framed it as a sort of national dividend.
That number, $2,000 per person, you better believe that got the market's attention immediately. But for investors, the big question wasn't just if it would happen, but how on earth a stimulus that big would actually be funded.
And see, this is key. Unlike those broad stimulus checks we saw during the pandemic, this plan is structured totally differently. It would be paid for with new tariffs and handed out through targeted tax cuts. Because it wasn't just helicopter money, cash just printed out of thin air. The market started to see it as a much more credible idea.
And boom, you can see the impact right here. Both digital gold, that's Bitcoin, and actual physical gold, they both shot up in perfect sync right after the news broke. When you see two assets like that move identically, it's a huge flashing signal that investors are taking a major stimulus event very, very seriously.
But hold on, that stimulus promise wasn't the only big news coming out of Washington. At almost the exact same time, another massive cloud of economic uncertainty was just poof, gone.
Suddenly, headlines were everywhere confirming the Senate had passed the first big step in a deal to stop a government shutdown. You could almost hear a collective sigh of relief from the markets.
Now, with 8 Democrats actually crossing the aisle to vote yes, the hardest part was over. And that sent a really strong signal to investors that, hey, a full-blown crisis was probably going to be avoided.
You have to understand, for the markets, a government shutdown is just this giant, dark cloud of uncertainty. So getting rid of it, even for a little while, it's like the sun coming out. It gives investor confidence a huge immediate boost.
It's super important to remember, though, this is not a permanent fix. Not at all. It's a temporary patch that funds the government for less than 90 days. They're basically just kicking the can down the road until early next year.
All right, on to our second clue. This is where we see that the news from the US, that's not the whole story, not even close. The real power behind this rally was already building up somewhere else entirely.
To really get a sense of the sheer force we're talking about, we have to look all the way across the globe to South Korea. Its stock market has basically become the poster child for a massive, worldwide investment mania that was just sitting there waiting for a spark.
So the KOSPI, which is South Korea's main stock index, has turned into this key indicator for a giant global trend that's sucking in money from all over.
And just look at this chart. The KOSP is moving in almost perfect lockstep with the big funds that track artificial intelligence stocks. I mean, that is not a coincidence. The correlation is just incredibly tight.
And that connection goes straight to the biggest names in the AI game, like Nvidia. It shows you exactly where the global money is flowing, into anything and everything that has to do with AI.
In fact, this AI craze is so intense that trading volumes for crypto on Korean exchanges have absolutely plummeted. The same crowd that was chasing crypto a year ago is now chasing the AI dream, just pouring money into chip makers and any related tech they can find.
So why South Korea? What makes it so important? Well, its economy is heavily based on exports and is super sensitive to tech cycles. That makes it the perfect barometer for global demand for all the tech that's powering this AI boom. It's basically become a magnet for foreign cash.
So what happens when you combine all that good news from the US with this simmering global AI mania? Well, you get the explosive rally we just saw. But, and this is a big but, it also comes with a really serious warning.
Analysts are definitely starting to sound the alarm.
This analysis from Bank of America is pretty blunt, saying that the market is showing all the classic signs of being extremely stretched, at least according to their bubble models.
And while nobody, and I mean nobody, knows exactly when it will happen, history has taught us over and over that bubbles like this, they all end the same way. And it's usually pretty painful.
And that really leaves us with the big takeaway. The good news out of Washington was like pouring gasoline on a fire that was already burning hot, thanks to the global AI frenzy. It created the perfect conditions for a classic bubble. So the only question now isn't if it's going to pop, but when. If you found this video helpful, be sure to smash that like button and subscribe so you don't miss your next daily edge. More news in our Telegram channel in the first comment. See you next time.